Out. Right now. Get out of my command tent, lady." Major Drew Hammond did not look at her when he said it. He was looking at the map, at the red graphics crawling across the acetate, at the fight he was losing. His finger stabbed the air toward the canvas flap. "This is a war fight, not a field trip. I do not have a square foot in here for a clipboard." The Tactical Operations Center smelled of dust and diesel and coffee burned to tar. 3 radios talked at once. A generator droned under the canvas like a trapped wasp. Red lens light turned every face the color of an old wound. Day 3 in the box. The high desert outside was 104 degrees and climbing, and inside this tent the battalion was dying by the numbers, 1 grid square at a time. 2 hours earlier, their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Pete Garver, had been called a notional casualty by an observer controller and pulled off the net. Command had fallen to his operations officer. Hammond was 36 years old, sharp, ambitious, and drowning. He had the maneuver fight in one ear and the fires fight in the other, and a brigade commander on a 3rd radio asking why his line had folded. 2 companies were combat ineffective on the scoring system. His left flank had been turned an hour ago, and he was still finding out about it. He did not have room in his head for the silent woman who had been standing at his fires map for the last 40 minutes, writing in a small green notebook, saying nothing. She wore dusty, unmarked coveralls, sun bleached the color of the ground. No flag on the shoulder he could see. No name. The dust had gotten into the seams of her until she looked like part of the terrain. To Hammond, she was one more contractor, one more data collector, one more body the rotation had glued to his staff to grade him while he failed. He had decided what she was worth the moment he saw the notebook. "Sergeant," he snapped his fingers at a young soldier by the entrance, "walk the observer out. I want this aisle clear, and I want it clear now." The woman closed the notebook. She did not argue. She did not flush or stiffen or look at the major at all. Her eyes went somewhere else entirely. They went to the fires overlay, to a single 6-digit grid scrawled in grease pencil, and to the friendly graphic, a small blue diamond, sitting directly on top of it. They went to the firing battery's call sign written beside it. They went to the clock. She had read the whole kill in 9 seconds. She let them walk her into the heat anyway. The sergeant touched her elbow, embarrassed, and steered her toward the flap. She went without resistance, one deliberate step after another. Behind her, a young lieutenant's voice climbed over the radio noise, reading a call for fire back to a firing battery. The cadence too fast, the breath too short, the voice of someone being pushed faster than thought. At the back of the tent, a lean man in plain trainer's gear watched the woman leave, and watched the major lean back into his map. Master Sergeant Emmett Cardno had been an observer controller for 6 years and a soldier for 22. He had a face like a dry creek bed and the patience of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything a battalion could do to itself. He said nothing, but his jaw set like setting concrete. He knew exactly who had just been thrown out of that tent, and he knew exactly what she had been looking at, and he knew that the next 90 seconds were going to matter more than anything else on the entire range. Hammond never saw any of it. He was already back in his fight, both hands flat on the map board, reading the red as it ate the blue. "Talk to me about the Eastern Company," he said to no one and everyone. "Why am I hearing about my flank from brigade and not from my own net?" No one answered him fast enough, and that was its own kind of evidence. A battalion staff is a living organism, and a healthy one talks to itself constantly, cross-checking, second-guessing, catching the thing the next man missed. This one had gone quiet in the way a frightened crew goes quiet. Each man hunched over his own piece of the disaster, nobody lifting his head to look at the hole. That was the real wound, deeper than the turned flank. The tent had stopped being a brain and become 8 separate men, each certain the others had it handled. Into a room like that, a quiet woman reading a map carefully was not an asset. She was a reproach, and Hammond, drowning, had thrown the reproach out the door rather than ask it what it saw. The canvas flap dropped behind the woman in the coveralls. Inside, the lieutenant keyed her mic again, and the word "danger close" went out over the air. Outside, the woman started walking, fast, straight, no wasted motion, toward a truck with a long whip antenna parked 40 meters off across the churned dirt. She did not look back at the tent. There was nothing in the tent she needed. Everything she needed was already in her head, plotted and timed, and it was telling her she had seconds, not minutes. Outside, the heat hit like a flat hand, and Colonel Vivian Salazar did not slow down for it. She crossed the 40 meters to the observer controller truck in 22 seconds. She did not run. Running was for people who had lost the time to think, and she had not lost it. She had been counting it since 0941. She walked the way she did everything, at a deliberate pace that never changed, boots steady on the broken ground, and her mind ran the math the whole way. Target grid, the one in grease pencil. Firing battery, the one whose call sign had answered on the net. Munition, high explosive, 3 rounds, danger close. And under the impact grid, on the same 100 meters of dirt, a friendly scout section and a civilian role-player cell, a notional village, 12 soldiers, and a handful of contracted actors playing local leaders, sitting exactly where the steel was meant to land. 300 meters of error. The math did not care that no one had asked her. The math never cared. That was the one mercy of it, and the one cruelty. Cardno reached the truck a step behind her. He had followed her out without being told, the way a good senior NCO follows the one person in the area who knows what is happening. He did not ask her if she was sure. He had watched her stand at that map for 40 minutes, and he had watched her eyes. And he knew that a field artillery colonel who had spent 19 years reading fires nets did not misread one now. "You want me to call it, ma'am," he said. "Or you? Confirm it first." Her voice was low and even, pitched under the generator noise, every syllable doing a job. "Raise the ground controller at the scout grid. I want eyes on those friendlies before I stop 10,000 people. I am not freezing this rotation on a memory. I am freezing it on a fact." She pulled a controller's headset off the truck's hook, not a contractor's tablet, a headset wired into the master control net that ran the entire exercise, the net that every observer controller on 40 kilometers of desert monitored, and settled it over one ear. She checked the frequency without looking, by feel, the way you check a thing you have checked 10,000 times. She was, in that moment, the calmest moving object on the whole range. Inside the tent, they still did not know. The fire support officer was reading the mission back. The major was leaning into the maneuver fight, relieved the distraction was gone, certain the small annoyance had been handled. The grease pencil grid sat on the map, and the blue diamond sat under it. And no one in the command tent was looking at either, because everyone in the command tent was looking at the thing that was loud instead of the thing that was lethal. There was a discipline to the waiting that no one in the tent would ever have credited her with. The amateur stops the exercise the instant fear arrives. The professional stops it the instant certainty does, and not 1 second before, because a senior controller who freezes 10,000 soldiers on a hunch loses the only thing that makes the next freeze obey. The absolute trust that when she calls it, it is real. Salazar had spent her whole second career building that trust, one correct call at a time. She would not spend it on a guess. She would spend it on a confirmed grid, 2 sets of eyes, and a clock that had run almost all the way down. Salazar keyed nothing yet. She waited 1 beat to be sure. The cursor of the whole exercise hovered on her thumb, and she held it there, because the only thing worse than being slow was being wrong, and she had spent 19 years learning the difference. Inside the command tent, the dismissal of the observer did not end with the flap. It became the weather. A captain at the operations board muttered something about the lady with the notebook, and a warrant officer beside him snorted, and somewhere down the table a sergeant grinned into his coffee. The mood of the room took its cue from the major, the way a squad takes its cue from the loudest man in it. The observer had been a nuisance. The major had thrown her out. Therefore, she had been nothing, and the staff exhaled and laughed, the short, ugly laugh of tired men, glad to have something beneath them. It was not cruelty, exactly. It was relief looking for a target. But it told you everything about whose voice that tent had already decided was worth its time. At the fires desk, First Lieutenant Claire Bishop wasn't laughing. She was 24 years old, and on her first rotation in the seat, and she was being eaten alive. A forward company commander was screaming for fire. His element was pinned by the opposing force, taking notional casualties, the simulation system stripping his combat power point by point, and he wanted 3 rounds on a grid he had passed her 90 seconds ago. Bishop had the call for fire in front of her. She had the firing battery ready, and she had, in the bottom of her stomach, a small, cold flicker of doubt, because the grid he had given her was close, very close, to a friendly graphic she half remembered plotting that morning before the sun was even up, when the scout section's position had come across as a routine report, and she had dutifully drawn it on her map. She looked at the grid. She looked at her map. The flicker became a cold finger drawn straight up her spine. She opened her mouth to ask. "Confirm friendlies are clear of Lieutenant." The captain at the operations board did not even turn his head. "Send it. They are danger close and pinned, and you are the only thing between them and the rounds they need. Stop slowing it down." The institutional weight came down on the flicker of doubt and crushed it flat. He was a captain. She was a lieutenant on day 3 of the worst week of her career, in a tent full of men who had just laughed at the last person who got in the way. The forward company was dying on the radio. Every voice in the room that outranked her was pushing the same direction. She swallowed the question, and she hated herself for swallowing it even as it went down, and she passed the mission to the firing battery. 40 meters away, in the truck, Salazar heard the whole thing through the controller monitor. She heard the lieutenant's voice catch on the word friendlies. She heard the captain roll over it. And 19 years fell away, and for 1 second, she was not a colonel at a training range. She was a lieutenant in a different desert, being told to stay off the net while better men than her made the worst decision of all their lives. "Not yet," she said quietly to Cardno, who had returned to her shoulder with the ground radio against his ear. "Let her catch it. Give her 3 seconds. Let the lieutenant save herself." It was the most generous gamble on the whole range, and it was the wrong one, and Salazar knew it even as she made it, because she of all people knew exactly how heavy a captain's voice was on a lieutenant's doubt. She knew the precise weight of it. She had been crushed under it once, and she had been promising herself for 19 years that she would never be the weight and never be the crushed again. The mission went to the firing battery. The battery acknowledged, crisp and professional. The fire direction center began to compute. The word shot was now seconds away. The announcement that 3 high-explosive rounds were leaving the tube toward a grid where 12 of the battalion's own soldiers sat in the dirt, with no idea the sky was about to open on them. Bishop's thumb rested on the transmit bar, and she did not press it again, because the mission was already gone, out of her hands, climbing the chain toward the guns. Somewhere, a viewer is watching this who has stood in that lieutenant's boots, who saw the thing no one else saw, who tried to say it, and got talked over by someone louder and more certain and more senior. If that is you, stay, because of everyone in this story, The woman they threw into the sun is the one you want to be by the end. And if these stories find the part of you that refuses to look away, subscribe to Honor Tales, so the next one finds you too. The mistake became official, the way mistakes always do in a command tent. Quietly, correctly, with everyone doing their job exactly right. The firing battery read the mission back word for word. The fire direction center turned the grid into a deflection and a quadrant, and the gun line laid the tubes. Every number was checked. Every number was right. The deflection was right for the grid, and the grid was wrong for the world, and that was the horror of it. The system was working perfectly toward a massacre. 6 soldiers on a gun crew doing their jobs flawlessly, about to do a terrible thing flawlessly. Every checklist was green. The machine did not know that the people under the impact grid were friends. The machine never knows. That is what the people are for. On the gun line, 2 kilometers back, 6 soldiers moved through a drill they had run 10,000 times. The number 1 man set the deflection. The number 2 man set the quadrant. The gunner checked the bubble and called the tube laid. They were 19 and 20 and 22 years old, and they were excellent at their jobs, and not one of them would ever have agreed to do the thing the data was asking them to do if they had known what it was. That was the cruelty of a well-run gun line. It did exactly, precisely, beautifully what it was told. It had no eyes for the grid. It trusted that someone, somewhere up the chain, in a tent with a map, had used theirs. 300 meters of error does not feel like anything at the tube. It feels like a normal mission, on a normal day, in a war that wasn't real, about to do something that would have been very real indeed. Major Hammond signed off on the fires the way an acting commander signs off on 100 things he cannot personally see in the middle of a battle. His mind was on the maneuver fight, on the brigade commander demanding answers, on his folding Eastern Company. He gave the fires net a fraction of his attention and a full measure of his authority, and the two together pushed the mission another step toward the tubes. He would remember that signature for the rest of his career, the half-second of half-attention that almost cost 12 lives. But he did not know that yet. Right now, it was just one more thing he approved while looking at something else. In the truck, Salazar read the firing data as it crossed the net and confirmed the splash point to the meter. Her eyes did not leave the controller's map. Her hand did not move. Everything in her had gone to the single point of stillness that she had spent 19 years learning to find. The stillness that came not from calm, but from absolute attention. The stillness of a person who has reduced the entire roaring world down to one grid and one clock. "Batteries laid," Cardno said. He had a second radio against his other ear now, working 2 nets at once. "FDC's computing. Ma'am, when you call it, I have the ground OC at the scout position standing by to physically wave those friendlies down and out. But the timeline is gone. We are talking seconds, not minutes. I know the timeline." She did not look up. "Get me the scout grid. Confirmed occupied or not. One word." Cardno keyed the ground controller and asked the only question that mattered. He held the handset to his ear and waited, and the desert held still around the waiting, and the engines of 10,000 soldiers' worth of vehicles hummed on toward a single second that had not happened yet. A bead of sweat ran the length of his jaw and dropped into the dust and was gone. The firing battery's voice came across the net, flat and procedural and final, the voice of men about to be very good at the worst possible thing. "Batteries ready, standing by for shot." The net went quiet, the way a room goes quiet before a glass hits the floor. Everyone was waiting on a word. The whole desert was waiting on a word, and almost none of it knew that the word it should be waiting for would come from a truck nobody was looking at. Salazar's thumb moved to the controller frequency and rested there, light. Ready? Certain. In the last seconds, the confirmation came back, and it was not a guess. "Scout position occupied," Cardno said. His voice did not change, which was how Salazar knew it was true. Cardno's voice only flattened when the news was bad. Ground OC has eyes on 12 friendlies, and the village cell, dead center of the impact grid. He confirms, independent. He is looking at them right now. "Ma'am, it's a kill." 2 sets of eyes, reaching the same answer from 2 different places. Not a coincidence. Not one person's lucky memory. Not the worn old contrivance of the lone hero who happened to know. The colonel in the truck had seen it from the map, and the sergeant on the ground had seen it from the dirt. And the math from both directions met in the middle and spelled the same word in the same letters. Fratricide. The most hated word in the artillery. The one every fire direction center on Earth is built to make impossible. And it was about to happen anyway, because a room had decided whose voice counted before it knew who was speaking. A few meters off, a junior observer controller, a young captain on his first rotation as a trainer, sent over to the truck for a routine battery status, had stopped walking entirely. He stood frozen in the heat, watching the woman in the dusty coveralls with the controller's headset over one ear, watching the senior sergeant working 2 radios at her shoulder, watching the stillness of her, and he leaned to Cardno and whispered the question that was on his whole face. "Who is she?" Cardno did not whisper back. He said it plain because some things are owed the dignity of being said out loud and at full volume. "You see the woman they just threw out of that tent? That is the senior controller for this entire rotation. A field artillery colonel with more time on a gun line than that major has in the Army. She can stop this whole war with 1 transmission, and every controller on this range will obey it before the echo dies." He looked at her, and something close to reverence crossed his hard, dry face. Pray she does it in time, because nobody else out here can. Salazar heard all of it, and reacted to none of it. Stillness had become the whole of her. She was not angry. Anger was noise, and noise cost time, and she had no time to spend on it. She had the firing data, the friendly grid confirmed twice, and the authority of the master control net, and she held all 3 in her hand, the way she had once held a lieutenant's gold bars, and she gave the firing battery and the fire direction center the exact half-second they had left to be right on their own. She believed in giving people that half-second. She had not been given hers. They didn't take it. The forward company keyed again, the commander's voice cracking with the stress of a fight his body believed was real, screaming for the rounds that would land on his own people, and the gun line's lanyards came taut. Here is the thing the next 10 seconds will prove, and it is the reason this channel exists. So before they happen, sit with it for 1 breath. The quietest person in a room is very often the only one who can stop the catastrophe everyone else is rushing toward. The woman they decided was nothing is about to say 1 word, and 10,000 soldiers are going to obey it. If you want to know who earns that kind of authority, and exactly what it cost her to earn it, stay with her to the end and subscribe to Honor Tales, because the answer is the whole story. Before she said the word, the story has to go back, because you cannot understand the word without the price she paid for it. Summer. 2007. A different desert and a real one. First Lieutenant Vivian Salazar was 26 years old and a battery fire support officer in a combat outpost the size of a parking lot. The walls were sandbags, and the roof was plywood, and the radios never stopped, and the heat was a living thing that pressed on you while you slept. A patrol was pinned in a wadi 4 kilometers out, taking fire, calling for danger-close artillery to break contact. The grid came in over the net, relayed and rushed, and ragged with stress. The company commander wanted it serviced now. Salazar plotted it, and her hand stopped. The grid was 300 meters off from where the patrol's own position report had put their lead element 10 minutes earlier. 300 meters, in the direction of friendly forces. She checked it twice in the time it took her heart to beat 4 times. The numbers did not lie. The grid in the call and the grid in the last position report could not both be right. And if the rounds went where the call said, they would walk straight across the patrol they were meant to save. She keyed the internal net. Her voice was steady, because even at 26, she had been the kind of person whose voice went steady when it mattered. "Sir, I have a 300-meter discrepancy between this fire mission and the patrol's last reported position. I need to confirm friendlies before we shoot. 30 seconds. That is all I'm asking. 30 seconds." The company commander was a good man having the worst night of his life, and good men having their worst nights make the choices that haunt the rest of them. His soldiers were screaming on the radio. He had 30 seconds of patience left in the entire world, and he had already spent it on the dark. "Stay out of the net, Lieutenant. They are dying out there. Send it." She was 26. He was a major. The men were dying on the radio, or they sounded like they were. And the weight of his rank and his certainty and his fear came down on her 30 seconds and crushed them to nothing. She could have pushed. She had thought about it 10,000 times since, in the small hours, the way a person turns a stone over and over, looking for the side that does not cut. She could have keyed the net again. She could have refused to relay the mission until someone confirmed the grid. She had the technical right, and none of the standing. And at 26, she had not yet learned that the two are different things. That authority on paper means nothing in a tent that has already decided your voice is in the way. She had believed that being right would be enough, that the numbers would speak for themselves, that a major would surely listen to a lieutenant who had the math. She had believed all the things you are allowed to believe exactly once. She sent it. The mission fired. And the discrepancy was real. The script of that night does not need to be graphic, and it will not be. It is enough to say that the radio which had been screaming went quiet in a way that radios do not go quiet from relief. It is enough to say that a grid which should have held the enemy held men who wore the same flag she did. It is enough to say that Vivian Salazar had been the one who saw it, who plotted it, who flagged it, who asked for 30 seconds with her voice steady and her hand shaking. And that being right hadn't saved a single soul. Being right hadn't been enough. Not even close. She didn't fall apart. That was almost the worst of it. She did the after action, and she wrote the report in her own clean handwriting. And she stood at the small ceremony with her hands at her sides. And then she made a decision in the part of herself that no commander ever sees and no award ever marks. She decided that she would never again be the person who saw the kill and was not hurt. And she understood, even at 26, that there was only one honest way to make that true. She could not promise herself she would always be believed. People do not get to promise that. But she could put herself, for the rest of her career, in the one chair where seeing the kill and stopping the kill were the same single act. So she took the slowest, least glorious road in the Army on purpose. She mastered fires the way other officers chased command photos. She became the expert nobody thanks and everybody needs. And when they finally offered her the Colonel's Eagle and a choice of jobs, she did not take the one with the parade and the flag in the office. She took the one at the training center, the chair where a senior controller can stop 10,000 soldiers with one word. And she sat in it, rotation after rotation, year after year, teaching other people's battalions not to make her mistake, in the one place on earth where the rounds were notional and the dead stood back up and walked to the after-action tent. Now, 19 years and one continent away, the loop had come back around, and it had come back inverted. The lieutenant who saw the kill was no longer the one being told to stay off the net. This time, the net was hers. The firing battery's voice climbed toward the word that ends arguments. In effect, Stand by. Shot over. Inside the command tent, the line was crossed on the record, in full, by people who were certain to their bones that they were right. Bishop tried one last time. She had heard something in her own gut that would not go quiet no matter how many ranks sat on it, and she keyed the net against every ounce of pressure in that tent. Battery, fires desk. Confirmed friendlies are clear of the impact grid before you. Lieutenant, off the net. The captain at the operations board. Cutter Stone dead. Sharp and final. And the forward company's commander cut over both of them with another scream for rounds, and the mission rolled on through the override the way water rolls over a stone that has been in the river 1,000 years. The battalion had now, officially, on the recorded net, with multiple voices, ordered high-explosive fire onto a grid occupied by its own soldiers. It was not a crime. No one in that tent wanted anyone dead. Every man in it believed he was saving lives. It was something both smaller and larger than a crime. It was a room that had decided, in advance, whose voice was worth hearing, and had been wrong about every single one of them. 40 meters away, the stillness that had held Vivian Salazar for 19 years came apart. And it came apart the way a blade comes out of a sheath. One clean line. No waste, no warning. She had the firing data. She had the friendly grid, confirmed twice, by 2 sets of eyes, from 2 directions. She had the authority of the master control net under her thumb. For the first time in the entire story, she smiled. It was small and it was grim, and there was nothing of triumph in it. It was the smile of a woman who had waited 19 years to be the one who got to speak, and who would have given anything to have never had to learn why the speaking mattered so much. She keyed the all-controller frequency, and she spent exactly 3 words because she had learned a long time ago that the words that stop a war do not need to be loud, only certain, only true, only spoken by the one person with the standing to mean them. Index. Check fire. Across 40 kilometers of desert, the observer controllers echoed it on every net at once, a wave of it rolling outward from the truck nobody had been looking at. Index. Index. Check fire. Check fire. All stations. All stations. The firing battery's shot died in the gunner's throat with the lanyard already taut in his fist. The Fire Direction Center froze its data mid-computation, numbers hanging unfinished on the screen. A ground controller stepped into the open beside the scout position and threw the physical ceasefire signal, both arms crossed and raised against the white sky, and held it. For one heartbeat, nothing in the desert moved. And then the entire exercise stopped. Every gun, every vehicle, every one of 10,000 soldiers, on the word of the woman they had walked into the heat. The freeze was the reveal. There was no formation. There was no salute. There was only a battle that had been roaring 1 second and was silent the next. A silence so total you could hear the wind find the cam nets, and a major who came out of his tent to find out who had dared to do it. Hammond shoved through the canvas flap into the glare, furious, certain it was a mistake, certain someone had pulled the plug on his fight at the exact moment he might have turned it. "Who called Index?" he shouted at the first controller he saw. "Who shut down my battle? I want a name and I want it now." The controller, who knew exactly who, said nothing and pointed at the truck. Hammond crossed the ground in long, angry strides, the dressing down already building in his mouth, and he was still building it when he got close enough to see clearly, and the words dried up and blew away. The woman at the truck was lowering a controller's headset from her ear. The dusty coveralls were the same, but she had turned to face him, unhurried, and the late sun caught the subdued embroidery on her collar that the dust had hidden all morning, the spread eagle of a full colonel, 2 grades, and a different world above him. And Master Sergeant Cardno was standing at her shoulder like a man standing post, and in her hand was not a contractor's clipboard, but the thick, weatherproof binder of the controller's master log. Hammond's face went through it in stages, and every stage was visible, and the story does not look away from any of them. Annoyance first, the last of his momentum. Then confusion, as the eagle on her collar refused to fit into the world he had built that morning. Then disbelief. Then the slow, terrible recognition as Cardno began to speak and the grid was read aloud. Then, last, the cold drop of horror all the way to the bottom. Major. Cardno's voice was level and merciless and entirely without mercy's enemy, cruelty. This is Colonel Salazar, Senior Controller, this rotation. The grid your battery was about to service had your own scouts and the village cell sitting dead on it. 12 friendlies and the role players. She caught it standing at your map. 11 minutes before you put her out of your tent. The horror landed last, and it landed all the way down, and it stayed. It was not the horror of being outranked, though he was by 2 grades and a lifetime. It was not even the horror of being wrong in front of his staff, though he was that too. It was the horror of the counterfactual, the clean, cold understanding of the morning that had almost happened. The one where no quiet woman had been standing at his map, where the rounds had left the tube, where the after-action review would have been held over 12 flag-draped cases instead of a dark screen. He could see that other morning as clearly as the one he was standing in. He would see it for years. Every commander carries 1 or 2 of those, the mornings that did not happen, because someone they had dismissed reached out and stopped the world. Hammond had just been handed his, and he knew, looking at the eagle on her collar, that he had nearly earned it the worst possible way. Salazar did not raise her voice. She had never once raised her voice in the entire story, and she did not start now. She turned the notebook around, the small green notebook he had decided made her a tourist, a clipboard, a nuisance, and it was open to a page, and the page was the controller's running log in her own precise hand, and on it was the bad grid, the friendly graphic, the word fratricide underlined once, and a time. I logged it at 0941, Major, she said quietly. 11 minutes before you had me walked out into the sun. That is why I was standing at your map. Not to score you, not to be in your way, to stop exactly this. She let that sit 1 second. I would have told you. You did not give me the chance. She did not say another word about the tent. She did not need to. The tent was in the air between them, and it would stay there for a long time. A tactical vehicle came over the rise and stopped hard, pulled in by the range-wide Index, and Brigadier General Roy Tennant, who commanded the entire combat training center, stepped down from it. He took in the truck, the colonel, the master log, the ashen major, the whole still and silent desert, in one slow sweep of a man who had seen this kind of morning before and had learned exactly how much weight to put on it. He did not call anyone to attention. He did not stage a salute. He did not turn it into a ceremony, because the worst thing he could do to the lesson was make it about rank instead of about the 12 soldiers who were going to walk home. He looked at the log, and he looked at Salazar, and he gave her the only review either of them would ever need. Good stop, Colonel. Then he turned to Hammond, and his voice was not cruel, but it was iron all the way through. After-action review. My tent. 1 hour. Bring your fire support officer, and bring your fire's net recording, and bring all of it, Major. We are going to walk through every single second of this, together, until everyone in that tent understands what almost happened here, and why. Hammond stood in the white light between the colonel he had ejected and the grid that would have been a mass grave of his own people, and he understood, finally and completely, and without any way left to argue it down, that the worst thing he had done that morning was not lose the fight. Losing the fight was survivable. Losing the fight was what the box was for. The worst thing he had done was decide who was worth listening to before he knew who was talking. The reckoning was not handcuffs. It was a tent, a screen, and the truth played back 1 second at a time, with nowhere to hide in any of them. The after-action review ran for 2 hours, and Colonel Salazar ran it the way she did everything. Calm, exact, generous about the person, and merciless about the facts. She put the fire's net recording up on the screen and let it play, raw, with the timestamps running. The moment Bishop's voice caught on the word, friendlies. The moment the captain rolled over her without turning his head. The moment Hammond's hand waved the observer toward the door. And then the 11 minutes of silence on the screen, while the only person who had seen the kill walked across the dirt to a truck. 11 minutes the battalion had spent rushing confidently toward killing its own. And then, at the end, 3 words, spoken once, that stopped it all. She did not gloat. She let the timeline do the work that gloating could never do. The room watched itself almost commit fratricide, second by second, and there was not a sound in the tent but the playback. "You did not almost kill 12 of your own because the observer was in your way, Major," she said at last, when the screen went dark and the tent was very quiet. "You almost killed them because you decided who was worth hearing before you knew who was speaking. The lieutenant saw it. The sergeant on the ground saw it. I saw it. 3 people in your formation had the truth in their hands at the same moment, and the only thing the 3 of us had in common was that this room had already decided we were small. A green lieutenant, a trainer in coveralls. That is who saw your kill coming. And this room talked over, walked out, or laughed at every one of us. Hammond did not defend himself. To his credit, and the story gives him that credit, because it was earned in that chair, in front of his staff, with everything to lose. He sat with it, and he took it, and he did not look away from the dark screen or from her. And then Salazar did the harder thing, the thing that no one had done for a 26-year-old lieutenant in another desert 19 years before. She put down the timeline, and she taught him. She told him, plainly, without softening it and without burying him under it, that this was precisely what the box was for. That the entire point of 10,000 soldiers and 40 kilometers of empty desert and 100 observer controllers was to make exactly this mistake here, in this place, where the rounds were notional and the dead stood back up and brushed off the dust and walked to the after-action tent to learn. That a commander who truly learned this lesson on a training range was worth 10 who never made the mistake, only because they had never once been tested hard enough to make it. That he would be a better commander for the rest of his career, steadier, slower to dismiss, faster to listen, if he let the day teach him instead of break him. There would be no arrest, no relief for cause. No career ended in a single morning on a single range. There would be something quieter, and in its way heavier. Hammond would finish the rotation under the eye of the colonel he had thrown out, and he would know it in every order he gave for the rest of the week, and he would carry the knowing into every command he ever held after. The patient ones, this genre keeps proving, do not need to destroy a man to win. They only need to be right, out loud, in the one place where it counts, and let him live the rest of his life having heard it. Then Salazar found First Lieutenant Bishop, who was standing alone outside the tent, certain her career had ended at 24, already drafting the resignation in her head. "Walk with me, Lieutenant." Bishop braced for the blow. It didn't come. "You doubted the grid," Salazar said, as they walked the line of the cooling guns. "You felt it in your gut, and you were right to. The failure today was not that you were unsure. Being unsure was the most correct thing anyone in that tent did. The failure was that a room full of people who outranked you talked over the one voice that had it right. That is not your shame to carry, Lieutenant. It never was. That is theirs. She stopped and turned and looked at the young officer the way she had spent 19 years wishing someone had once looked at her. And I am going to teach you to be impossible to talk over. By the time I am finished with you, no captain, no major, no general will ever roll past your voice on a net again. You are going to be the person in the room who sees the kill and stops the kill. I know that chair. I have sat in it for 19 years. Let me show you how to sit in it sooner than I did. This is the moment the channel exists for, not the freeze, not the reveal, not the major's ruin, because there was no ruin. It is this. The person who was once dismissed, turning to the next one in line and lifting her straight up out of the same hole. If that lands somewhere in you, tell us in the comments what it stirred, and subscribe to Honor Tales, so the next story finds you on the day you need it. The desert went copper at dusk. Colonel Vivian Salazar walked the line of cooling guns alone, the way she liked to, after the controllers had logged their notes and the soldiers had gone to refit, and the great machine of the rotation had exhaled. She stopped at the master log on the hood of the truck, and she signed it, and she closed the heavy cover. The bad grid was in there, and the time, 0941, and the 3 words. The whole day, reduced to a few clean lines on a weatherproof page. On the horizon, the dust of the next rotation's vehicles was already rising, a long brown smudge against the failing light. 10,000 more soldiers coming to make their own mistakes where it was safe to make them, where the rounds were notional and the lessons were free, and the dead stood back up. She had carried a single grid for 19 years, a grid in another desert, where she had seen the kill and been right, and not been heard, and buried men because of it. Today, on a training range, with one word, she had finally set it down. There was no memorial wall waiting for her. There was no phone buzzing in her pocket with a coded greeting from a ghost. There was no sequel and no shadow on the horizon, but dust. There was only a colonel, a logbook, and a lesson that would outlive the day, riding home tonight in a young lieutenant who would never again let a room talk over the truth. Behind her, in the refit yard, the day was already turning into the thing it would become, a story the soldiers would tell. By morning, every man in that battalion would know that the observer the major threw out had been the senior controller, and that she had stopped a fratricide from a truck 40 meters away with 3 words, and that she had not gloated and had not destroyed anyone, and had instead taught them. The story would lose nothing in the telling. Stories like that never do. It would follow Hammond to his next assignment and his next, and it would follow Bishop too. But for her, it would be a different kind of story. The day a colonel told her that her doubt was the most correct thing in the room, and meant it, and then made good on the promise to teach her. Years from now, Bishop would stand in a tent of her own and refuse to let a room talk over a frightened lieutenant, and she would not always remember exactly why. The lesson would simply be in her, the way the worst lessons become the deepest ones. Salazar picked up the log, tucked it under her arm, and walked toward the lights. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.